So who currently owns the Warren Museum, and why is it no longer owned by the Warren family? Does Annabelle know? Do I have the real Annabelle? I don't have the real Annabelle. So by now you probably have heard that Matt Rife, who is a comedian, and YouTuber Elton Castee have invested in the Warren Museum. And that brings a bigger question. Why are outsiders in the context of the Warren family now purchasing parts of the museum? Well, we're going to get into it. But before we get into today's topic, I'm Stephanie, and I talk about the paranormal and strange. So let's start in 1952, where the museum was created. The world famous paranormal investigators, right? They created the Occult Museum, and it started in the basement of their Monroe home in Connecticut. And it was basically collections of artifacts from the Annabelle, but this is not Annabelle, or is it? No, it's not. And then cursed mirrors and all kinds of stuff that was locked away. But with that, they also founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, or known as an ESPR. This is where things get interesting, right? Because in this home, it wasn't just Ed and Lorraine. They in fact had a daughter named Judy Warren, and that is their only kid. But Judy would later on marry Tony Spera. So Judy was mostly raised by her grandparents though, so that should definitely be noted, because based off of what we know, they did travel. They traveled for paranormal investigative reasons, and they also traveled because they also would go and sell their art pieces and paintings. But because she was raised mostly by her grandparents, you can only imagine that when she would be home and staying in her home with her parents, the fear that something is lurking in this basement would just creep up on you, especially when you are trying to go to bed at night. So she said that she feared a lot of things, and when she would sleep there, she would feel uncomfortable and at times couldn't even sleep by herself, which again, who could blame her? Imagine all these artifacts that have caused death or tragedy just right underneath your home, right? Like, yeah, it's going to be hard to ignore that as you're trying to relax and get some shut-eye. So at this point, the museum is owned by both Ed and Lorraine Warren all the way up until 2006. So Ed Warren tragically passes away. So the only person left to really handle all of this is Lorraine Warren, because as I mentioned, Judy kind of had this fear and no interest in really running the museum or the paranormal at this time. Up until Lorraine passed, it was Lorraine and her son-in-law running the museum and, doing what they could with it up until Lorraine passes and they shut down this museum. And that was because due to zoning issues. So a lot of the residents were complaining that there was people trespassing, knocking on doors, peeking through windows. Imagine someone just peeking through the window. That would be kind of annoying. I can see why people would want to reinforce zoning laws and things like that. It's almost like why if you, even in LA here, you visit places where the American Horror Story house, the season 1, if you go visit, it has these tall fences up there because people just walk up to it and take photos. And I can understand wanting to visit, wanting to, pique your curiosity after watching a movie or a TV show and wanting to visit that place. But obviously, if you're not doing it respectfully, there's going to be consequences, right? Also to add, a lot of the residents were complaining that the area in which they lived in, it was a very small, narrow street. So it wasn't made for a lot of people to park there. It really just wasn't made for commercial use. It was more so for residential use. Just another thing to add on there. So now then, Tony Spera steps in as the director of NESPR, and he is now assumed the legal custody of the artifacts, while Judy kind of stayed back a little bit out of the public eye in that respect, from what we know. And so obviously Tony's not gonna have this group by himself, so in comes Dan Rivera. And I'm going to shortly talk about this because I know there's a lot of conversation right now since his death is pretty fresh, but the ESPR, they had a lot of, from my understanding on the website, they did have events that they would do. There's even classes that you can take now. I don't know if that was a recent development or how long, but from my understanding, because the museum is permanently closed due to zoning restrictions, it kind of made sense when I started to see that they were trying to open it back up by doing tours throughout different states. So as of this year, they decided to do the Devils on the Run tour, and that included obviously building a special case, which I believe they made. Yeah, they made a travel case for Annabelle to basically move her safely out of the museum. And this sparked so much controversy, and people were coming up with all kinds of ideas like, oh, she caused a fire in New Orleans and prisoners to escape, or she went missing, which she was never missing. But so it caused all kinds of conversations. And then as of July of 2025, Dan Rivera tragically passed away. And of course, a lot of people were blaming it on the Annabelle doll. But, I don't really want to get into that. I just know that the family is definitely grieving. They don't want his death sensationalized, which now brings us to August of 2025, where the new announcement has been made that Matt Rife and Elton Castee have officially acquired the ownership of the Warren home and the Occult Museum. So now Tony Spera confirmed that Matt now serves as a legal guardian of Annabelle and the rest of the collection for the next 5 years, and they plan to reopen the museum for overnight stays and tours starting in summer of 2026. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to work. I'm not too familiar. From my understanding, when I do a quick search, it does say that the museum is permanently closed. So I'm wondering if they're going to move the artifacts out of there or what, or maybe it's just going to be very intimate groups for a limited amount of time. That I don't know, but I'm sure you're probably now asking, should they have bought it? Whether your question is coming from a place of the risks involved with these artifacts, or the fact that perhaps maybe a family member should continue on the legacy, because one would assume that family members are always going to want to care about family legacy and remembering their family members in a more respectful way and factual way. I'm not saying that like Matt and Elton wouldn't do this. I'm just saying that I can see why these questions are rising from the new announcement. And how can we preserve the history of the Warrens, the museum, and all of that with so many murky waters, such as the museum permanent closing down to they're kind of now steering away and allowing outside people purchase something that once belonged to a family. It can get confusing. And I do have a quote that I want to share from denofgeek.com. There is a question that is quoted from Judy herself. They asked her, they said, "You don't want to be involved with the paranormal. Where does the Warren legacy go from here?" And she says, "As far as where we go from this, I would like to see it carried on. Of course, we'll see where it goes. I don't foresee anybody in our family. I just, I thought my grandson would be interested, but I guess he had his own problems. Personally, for me, if I had a museum of artifacts, because me and my husband both are psychics and we both also investigate here and there, and if we collected a lot of things, I would love for my family to continue to preserve that legacy rather than having outsiders own it. That's just me, though. I'm sure they're coming from a good place. I mean, I would like to think. I don't know all the details, but that's where I'm asking you now. What do you think? Do you think it should stay within the family? Do you think there's going to be family members that are going to be more interested in wanting to take over? Do you think there's more at play? Let me know. All right. Remember, stay strange.